Hi, my name is Becky Jennings, and this is the Response-Able Parenting Podcast. I give you the transformational tools to stop reacting to your children in the moment and start responding with intention.
Do you find yourself locked in a daily power struggle with your child? Do you fall back into old patterns like yelling or threatening just to stop the annoying behavior? Are you desperate to learn how to connect with your kids, set boundaries, heck, gain some cooperation? If this is you, you need to check out my community. Inside my community, you'll have access to my signature Strong-Willed Language course, where you learn how to regulate yourself, understand and speak your strong-willed kids' language to virtually eliminate the constant power struggles. You'll have access to my workshop library, giving you step-by-step strategies for sibling rivalry, listening, anger and aggression, emotional regulation, and more. You'll have weekly Q&A opportunities to get personalized answers on challenging situations. You'll get specific strategies for you based on exactly what's going on in your home. No umbrella strategy, no umbrella script, no bots. You'll get a personalized roadmap to support you. Plus, you'll get dozens of bite-sized lessons to regroup, stay on track, and stay motivated. It is time to stop walking on eggshells around your children and finally experience the release you are looking for. Join the community today and let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Response-Able Parenting. My name is Becky Jennings. I am your host, and today is actually a very special podcast episode. Not only do I get to honor my son, who I lost 6 years ago, but I'm also taking part in Podcasthon's groundbreaking nonprofit initiative, where over 1,500 different podcasts are doing curated, very specific podcast episodes to really bring awareness to nonprofits that they are drawn to, that they care about. And I am specifically doing this episode for the Maddox Foundation. This is a friend of mine who I have met through baby loss. She has most recently lost her son, Maddox. And so we are bringing awareness and raising money. What she does is she helps curate these boxes for women who are going through the worst moment of their lives, who are experiencing the trauma, the loss, the overwhelm, the confusion that comes with having a stillbirth, which comes from having infant loss very soon after your baby is born. So this is a very special episode. I hope I can keep it together. But trigger warning, I will be talking this whole episode about grief, about loss. I will be sharing specifics about what happened to my son, and I'll be sharing specifics about how I moved through the trauma, how I learned from it, what I learned from it, what my process was, whether it's the right process or not, just to bring awareness and really give you some insights as to how I moved through this. And then also on the other side of the deep entrenched trauma, the really challenging aspects of this, how to move into parenting with grief that is walking by your side the entire time. Because this grief never leaves your body. If you've ever read Body Keeps the Score, grief stays in your body. Your body remembers. Even if you can compartmentalize and put that moment on a shelf and not touch it, your body, your cells have a deep remembering of the trauma that has happened to your body. And so it's an honoring, it's a noticing, it's a really challenging place to parent from. And whether you have lost a child, whether you have lost a loved one, whether you are grieving a marriage, whether you are grieving family members, relationships, dogs, pets, things that you care about, it truly is a challenging place to grieve from. I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of losing a child and how that has impacted my parenting, but I believe that you will be able to pull a lot of valuable information from this episode about how to parent from a place of living with grief, experiencing trauma, and how that really impacts how we show up to our living children, how that shows up in our relationships. So I want to just take a second and say thank you to Jennifer for sharing the Maddox Foundation with me and for giving me the opportunity to highlight your foundation on this podcast episode. And I really hope that you check out her story. I will link all of her information. I will link what she is doing in the show notes. I will link the Podcasthon information as well. So you'll have all that information in the show notes if you want to take this a step further. Okay, here we go. So in 2018, my husband and I had a 1-year-old son, Hunter. He is my oldest. And we had decided that we were going to dive in, and we were actually excited to try to have 2 children under the age of 2. We wanted them very close in age, and we were very lucky that we tried one time and we got pregnant the first try. And it was kind of like, whoa, this is really happening. I really couldn't believe it. So Hunter was 13 months old when I got pregnant with my son, Jackson. And it was the perfect pregnancy, like literally the perfect pregnancy. I was the healthiest I had ever been. He was the healthiest baby I had ever had. I had had miscarriages before. Hunter was actually a twin, and we lost that twin midway through. And so this was like, wow, I'm actually going through a pregnancy that doesn't have any issues. This is incredible. I felt wonderful. I had, of course, the morning sickness and the things like that, but I just was really, I sailed through that pregnancy. And I was the healthiest I had been. Every single test and marker, he was just showing up like 10 out of 10. And at my 38th week appointment, I head into my doctor, and we just did the heart rate of the heartbeat monitor on my belly, and they measured my belly. And I was kind of thrown off by that for a second. I said, I'm really feeling like I need an ultrasound. And they said, oh, your ultrasound isn't covered by insurance. So that's actually going to happen at week 39. So we're only 7 days away. You'll be getting an ultrasound at week 39. And I said, okay, but part of my body was screaming out, but having no idea about even this real possibility. I just kind of ignored the warning signs in my body that my nervous system was sending me. Now in hindsight, I know that my mom instinct, my wisdom in my body was screaming out to me, telling me, push for what you think you should be getting right now. I didn't do that because I didn't understand. I didn't understand what was happening. And so I left, having listened to my baby's heartbeat, having felt him moving, and all signs looked great. Though when I was driving, I got this full overwhelmed panic saying, like, turn around, go back, push for that ultrasound. But I had seen the waiting room and it was packed, and I had to get back to work. I had to get back to my son, and so I was like, it's fine. I'll be back here in 1 week. So about 38 weeks, I started feeling contractions. I started going into labor at 38 weeks, which was really exciting because I had actually delivered Hunter at 40 weeks in 1 day. So to be early was kind of exciting. The last 2 weeks, as you know, are like the roughest 2 weeks. So I was pretty thrilled. But the labor was very inconsistent. It was, I'd have contractions that were 3 minutes apart, and they would last for 50 minutes, but then they'd drop off, and then they'd be like 7 minutes apart. And then they would be, 10 minutes apart. So I was advised to labor at home until it was consistent, and I was able to really see the 3 minutes apart before, or 3 or 4 minutes apart, and then come into the hospital. Well, that happened for 5 days. And so for 5 days, I was in a lot of pain. I was in active labor. I was laboring at home, and I was waiting. I was waiting for the contractions to be 4 minutes apart so that I could head to the hospital. My mistake, and in hindsight, obviously everything is clear in hindsight. But I had stopped counting kicks, and I had only focused on those contractions. So on January 4th, I was sleeping, and about 3 a.m., I felt a full body explosion. It was as if he just made the most, like, it was as if he punched out both arms and punched out both legs at the same time. And I felt like a combustion in my stomach, and then this huge body roll inside of me. And it woke me up, and I was in excruciating pain. I was just like, whoa, this must be how he's getting into position. This must be him getting ready. I bet it's happening today. So I went back to sleep with a little bit of excitement, kind of knowing that this was going to be the day. And again, my body was still in labor. And so on January 4th, when I woke up, I was just really focused on those contractions. And then about midday, probably around noon, I went outside to my husband and I said, I haven't felt him move in a long time, like since that big thing this morning. He said, okay, call the doctor. Like, let's see. So they advised me to take a sugar test and lie on my left side and wait. So I did. And I lied down on the couch. I drank that orange juice and I had that scoop of honey and I waited. And 45 minutes later, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. And so in a panic, we dropped my son off at the neighbors and we rushed to the hospital. And all the while, my instincts were like, this is it. This has happened. Your worst nightmare has happened. And I said to my husband, I think something happened with the cord. And he said, let's just get there. He's ever the optimist. He's trying really hard not to think of the worst case scenario. And we get to labor and delivery and we are rushed to the triage department and they hook me up to a heart rate monitor or an ultrasound machine, excuse me. And the first ultrasound machine, I'm lying on my side and my husband's sitting in the chair and I'm looking at him, like I can see him through the ultrasound machine. He's only like, I see like a little triangle in the ultrasound machine. So I can only see a little bit of his face, but I see his eyes staring at the ultrasound machine and he's just, they're getting wider and wider. And the tech says something along the lines of, this ultrasound machine has been giving us a little bit of trouble. I'm going to go get another one. So they went and got another one and they were like, maybe this machine isn't working. And so then they went and got another one. And on the fourth ultrasound machine, they confirmed that we had in fact lost my son and that he had no blood flow to his brain and his heart had stopped beating. And in that moment, it was as if time stopped. It was as if the floor had dropped out from underneath me. I never in a million years expected to hear, I'm so sorry, there is no heartbeat. At 38 weeks and 5 days, I had never in my life expected to hear those words. And I don't know what sounds came out of me. All I know is that I immediately went to blame. I blamed myself that it was my fault. I had killed him. I had done something wrong. It was my fault. I wasn't vigilant enough. I wasn't a good mother. Like I just rushed to blame myself. I felt like something had to be blamed because this was so horrific. This was so awful. No one should ever experience this. And I went into like this fight or flight mode. And unfortunately, I couldn't do anything because I'm in the hospital and he is inside of my body. And I was just like, let's just get him out so that we can do compressions, so that we can try to save his life. And when that was no longer an option, and I was told that could never be an option, the realization then sat in that I was then going to have to labor and deliver my son. And it felt like I was trapped in a hell that I had to escape from. They wheeled me down in a wheelchair down to the last room in the labor and delivery ward, I think with the hopes that I wouldn't hear live babies being born. And they wheeled me into the last room, the coat closet type room, and there was no windows, no anything, just the clock, the bed, and the baby warmer at the end of my bed. And they didn't even notice. And I asked the nurse, I said, "Could you please get that out of my room?" She's like, "Oh gosh, oh yes, oh my God, I'm so sorry." She takes it out of the room. She comes back in and she's shaking so badly that she can barely type. And I said to her, "Have you ever experienced this before?" And she's shaking and she's like, No, this is my very first time." And I looked her square in the eyes and I said, "This is my first time too. And I need you right now. I need you to guide me through this. I can't have you being panicked because I am panicked. I need you right now." And something shifted in the room, and she realized that it was her job to be my safety net in that room. And that woman became my advocate, became my just extension of my body. And she helped me through every single second of that moment. She was an angel. And I am so grateful for that woman. Okay. So I delivered my son, Jackson. He was my largest baby at 7 pounds, 20 inches. And I delivered him at midnight on the dot on January 5th, 0000 if you're in military time, which feels very fitting. And we held him for as long as we could before it felt impossible to keep holding on. And then went the challenge of learning how to live without him. I then had to do all the protocols and all the steps to leave the hospital. And I would fall asleep and think I had slept for 3 hours, and I would wake up and the clock had only moved 5 minutes. And then I would fall asleep again and I would think, oh my God, I just slept for 8 hours. And I would wake up and it had only moved 5 minutes. And this happened for over an hour. And it just felt like I was actually having to unlock the clues and the codes to an escape room. And at about hour 5, I signed, against the advice of the doctor, I signed the papers to just leave. I just was like, get me out of here. I have to leave. So around 6 a.m., we left the hospital and my son stayed in the morgue and my husband and I left. And I came home and all of the freshly washed burp cloths and onesies and little footy pajamas, they were all on the bed, ready for Jackson to come home. And I just pushed them off the bed and they created this pile on the floor and I fell asleep. And I slept till about 11, and I don't know why Hunter had slept in as well. And it was a miraculous thing, but I woke up to him calling to us and I didn't realize, but I had balled up my blanket and I was holding it and rocking it like a baby. And that was one of the first stages, denial of grief. So if you have not experienced grief, there are what they say 5 stages of grief, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So clearly the denial had set in, and I just couldn't believe what had happened. I found myself waking up multiple times, almost nursing this blanket. My body was just doing what it knew instinctually to do after you have a baby. And I was so dreading and so hoping that my milk wouldn't come in, because my body must know that I didn't actually have this baby. But as clockwork happens and as bodies happen, that came in around day 2. And then I had to go through the process of stopping that. And I was so angry. I was so angry that I had cabbage in my bra and I was taking Sudafed, and I was taking everything that you could do I was binding myself, and it was so painful and so frustrating, and I was so angry. And then we went to the bargaining stage where I'm putting all of his little clothes in a Tupperware, putting them all away from the drawers that I had freshly packed, and I'm on my hands and knees begging, just give him back to me. I will do anything in this world. Give him back to me. And of course, depression was very strong for a very long time. And I don't even know if I've actually moved into the acceptance. I live my life. But acceptance of your child no longer being with you is a very hard thing to accept. But a couple things that I really did, now having studied grief and loss and studied nervous system work and studied emotional regulation strategies, I understand a lot of the instinctual things that I gravitated towards right off the bat. Something that I gravitated towards immediately was a gratitude journal. And that was something that I had practiced in the past, is writing down and focusing on gratitude and positive affirmations and things of that nature. I had done that for many, many years, but I had fallen off of doing that. And one of the first things I did is I set out to, before I got out of bed every single day, before I got out of bed, I had to say at least one thing that I noticed that I was happy about. Because the depression and the sadness, oh my God, it was so awful. It was so overwhelming and overpowering. It took over my whole body and my being that I had to find just one thing that made me feel like, oh, life is still here. Life still exists. And I remember the very first day, so January 5th, I wrote down I was grateful for a toothbrush. And I was really grateful to brush my teeth. And I just remember being like, that was so simple, but I was so grateful for a toothbrush. And the next day I was so grateful for socks, just socks, fuzzy socks to keep my feet warm. And I was grateful for a weighted blanket. And I was grateful for, just really simple things. And in Kismet fashion, I was actually listening to one of my favorite podcasts today, and they had interviewed an author. Let me find her name, Florence Williams. They had interviewed Florence Williams, and she is an author and she's a journalist. And she actually just recently wrote the book, Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey. And she studies heartbreak, and she had a lot of wisdom. And looking back, I realized that I was actually doing what scientifically helps you get through heartbreak. And her acronym for this is AWE. Because it's almost like and I'll explain what the acronym is, but when we can focus on something that sparks awe in us, it's almost like the counterweight or the counterbalance to grief and sadness, to heartbreak. It's almost like the antidote is the opposite, right? Lacey Phillips from To Be Magnetic always says that the opposite is the medicine. And so awe, finding something that can truly bring you this like, wow, this is so beautiful. That is the counterbalance. That is the medicine to this grief, to this sadness, to this overwhelm. So she talks about the acronym AWE, which is awareness, to see something that is beautiful. The W is to wait and look at this thing that is so beautiful, to look at this thing and to take several deep breaths as you look at this thing. And then the E stands for exhale. And I was doing that with my gratitude journal. I was doing that by spending time outside. I was doing that by focusing on these moments. And studies actually show that if you do this consistently every single day for 6 weeks, you actually have a reduction in depression and sadness by 30%. And I noticed that I was really drawn to understanding. One of my coping strategies was to, first, the gratitude was a huge coping strategy for me. And the second was trying to understand everything. I think that's one part of loss and grief that we all experience, is trying to figure out why it happened, understand why this horrible thing happened. Because maybe if we understand, maybe it'll make sense. Maybe the pieces will come together and maybe I can find some sort of justification for this awful pain. So I read books about stillbirths. No matter how painful that was, I read all about the science of stillbirths. I also focused on the science of meditation and manifestation. I read that book, Becoming Supernatural, many times over and over and over again to learn how the brain and the body can heal itself. I was fascinated by this thought that we can actually heal our bodies through intentional grounding nervous system work. I was obsessed with understanding how the body functions, understanding how the body can heal, understanding the nervous system. I was obsessed, almost to probably a psychotic level. But I needed to know. I needed to know why. I needed that information to process. I used to believe that everything happens for a reason. I now no longer believe that, because I don't think anybody deserves these tragedies. I don't think that the universe is, or God, or whatever you believe in, is intentionally trying to harm you and hurt you and bring you pain. So I've abandoned that belief that everything happens for a reason. But what I do believe now, that it is our job to find reason and purpose in what has happened to us. I believe that it is our job to figure out how we can move through this, what we can learn from this, and how we can then spread a message and bring more awareness and bring more healing to the world through the tragedies that have happened to us. I do believe that Jackson, my son, was the catalyst to the shift in my life that actually really needed to happen. I was on a trajectory of a life that was fine, but it wasn't soul fulfilling. It wasn't my true authentic self. I was moving further and further away from the authentic person that I desired to be, but I had lost sight on how to become that person. And the rock bottom and the complete utter devastation that I experienced, it was as if my heart had completely cracked open, and it was so vulnerable and exposed and emptied out. But in that process, it stripped away all of the things that were no longer serving me. It gave me this licensing to look at everything, every friendship, every relationship, every activity, everything that I had committed to, and to look at it through a lens of complete and open rawness and say, does this serve me? Do I even care about this? Is this healthy? Is this helping me? Is this aligned? And with my heart cracked completely open, it gave me this opportunity to refill my heart with the things that matched my heart, refill my heart with the things that mattered, refill my heart with more of my authenticity, more of my rawness, my realness, my truth. And from that, I was able to really experience a life, really experience relationships at a level that I hadn't previously been able to. And my expectation of self and relationship dramatically increased as well, which again brings some challenges too, brings a level of feeling maybe aloneness, if that's a word, feeling lonely, because now I was on kind of like a different journey. And so I had to find my footing again. So I spent a lot of time figuring out that gratitude, figuring out how I could spend time in awe, even though at the time I didn't know it, I was following that protocol. And then I spent a large chunk of time trying to find that deep understanding of what happened. And then there came the part of accepting and not letting go and saying goodbye, but learning how to live alongside of grief and learning how to live with death and learning how to understand my nervous system. You see, my nervous system had been sending me cues that I was in danger, and I did not know that. I know that now. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. It's a way for us to learn, and it's a way for us to really integrate those lessons into our lives. But post-grief, your nervous system is different, right? Because like I mentioned from that book, The Body Keeps the Score, your cells remember. Your cells have a vivid memory of what has happened to you, and your nervous system has a vivid memory of what has happened and transpired inside of your body. And so your nervous system is now changed. Your nervous system has now adapted. Your nervous system is now, and what I have noticed, hypervigilant, because I had lost a little bit of that vigilance when I had stopped counting kicks and I had started counting contractions. Now my vigilance is on hyperdrive at all times with my living children. Every single day I drop them off at school, I get a little bit of panic. What if this is the last time I see them? What if something happens at school? Every single day. And I have to live with that. Every single time my fully capable husband goes on a fully fun date with the children and takes them on a solo adventure, I feel full body panic, wondering if this is the last time I see my children. I am always the driver in the car if we take a family trip. I am always at the helm, trying to control as much as I possibly can without being overbearing and a helicopter parent, while trying to allow my children space to become individuals, while allowing them to learn from natural consequences and mistakes and learning how to fall and break things and hurt things. And at the same time, my nervous system is saying, you need to be hypervigilant. What are you doing? And so it is very challenging, and I have to spend a lot of intentional time grounding myself, resetting my nervous system, going back into the window of tolerance. And so I have really adopted a large protocol of many different nervous system grounding tools, anywhere from music to dance, to going outside and lying on the ground to ground myself into the present moment, to feeling the sun on my face, to going for walks, to hypnotic meditations, to EMDR, to nervous system regulation practices through breath, through tapping. There have been so many different practices that I utilize, but I am aware that my nervous system is primed now to live at a higher state of anxiety, to live at a higher state of hypervigilance. And because of that, parents can be more reactive. And that is really, really hard. Because not only do we see the external threats around us potentially taking away our living children for the second or third time, we sometimes see them as threats, which doesn't make a lot of sense logically, but it makes all the sense in the world to our bodies. Because bigger noises, conflict, when they're fighting, when they're screaming at us, when they're kind of coming at us in dysregulated attack mode. The hypervigilance extends out to our children. So I found that for a very long time, before I found this work, I was hyper reactive to my eldest son. And I reacted in only the way that I knew, which was authoritarian practices, which was controlling him at every single move. Because if I could control him, if I could keep him in a timeout, if I could keep him behaving the exact way that didn't ruffle my feathers, then I would not feel so out of control. I would not feel so like crazy inside of my body. I now know that what he was experiencing was ADHD. I did not know that. What I now know is I was experiencing a hypervigilant nervous system. I did not know that. And so I think it's one of those challenging phases and challenging experiences as parents who have gone through a traumatic experience, who have just lost someone or something that they care about so much. I think about all of the parents who are now parenting after losing their home in the wildfires in Los Angeles and having nothing and having to start completely over. And you are parenting with that loss. That is grief. And your nervous system is going to have to process that and come back to an understanding of what is this hypervigilance? What is this anger? What is this anxiety? That shows up it manifests in sleep disorders. It manifests with these stress hormones flooding through our bodies on a regular basis. That manifests through depression. There are so many different ways that our nervous system is trying to cope. And what I implore you to do, if you are parenting right alongside of grief, is to find somebody who can help you walk that road, so that you're not alone, so that you don't walk around with the shame of how you should have been acting, how you should show up. Because should is just could doused in shame, just wrapped in shame. Could you parent better? Sure. Should you parent better? That is just dripping in shame. And shame leads to guilt, and guilt is not a great place to parent from. And grief is a really hard counterweight to parenting. It's a really, really challenging place. So I highly encourage you to seek support, whether that's a support group, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a coach like me who does parent coaching and helps parents understand their nervous system. It is essential to have the resources, to have the tools, to have the support, so that you can start to understand what your body is going through, so that you can start to understand and connect the dots. And then once you've connected the dots and have a deeper understanding about what has happened to you, then we can start to build the systems, build in the tools so that you can really support your nervous system, so that you can really support yourself in a way that, I'm not saying you live in the green for the rest of your life and you're never going to pop off on your kids again. I'm not saying that. But you understand how to bring yourself back into that window of tolerance. That window of tolerance being where you can handle, where your stress level is tolerable. Because when we live in grief and we let that saturate into our lives, we are outside of that window of tolerance on a minute-by-minute basis. We are outside of that window of tolerance regularly. And that is a painful, painful place to parent from. So as we parent with grief, there's a deep knowing in my body that grief will never go away, that the loss and the pain is right under the surface at all times. And if you are fresh to this, I am so sorry. And I am also here for you. And I found the most comfort from the people who have experienced this that were total strangers. I found the most comfort from phone calls from women who I have never met in real life, who I have never talked to again, but who called me through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. They called me and they just sat with me and they cried with me. One woman had lost her child 37 years ago, and she sat on that phone with me and she cried with me. I don't remember her name. She doesn't remember my name, I'm sure. But she was such a grounding source for me. And so my advice is, don't feel afraid to reach out to a perfect stranger, because it's often those people who are exactly what you need.
I want to share my free guide to managing our kids' meltdowns. We know that meltdowns are normal, but they still suck and can be ridiculously triggering. This 4-step free guide will help you break the cycle of reactivity and help you get through the meltdown without snapping yourself. Don't join your kid in the tantrum. Grab my free guide and learn how to manage meltdowns like a pro. Head to responsablepparenting.ck.page/meltdown, or just go and click the link in my show notes and get your guide today.
If you have lost a child, please reach out to me. I will happily talk to you. I will happily sit with you and share and listen and just be there to support you. I highly recommend that you check out the Maddox Foundation that's linked in my show notes, and that you speak to them and that you connect with them. If you need the resources they are providing, please reach out to them as well. Parenting with grief adds an extra layer to the already enormous challenge of parenting. But what I can share as maybe a glimmer of hope is that grief is kind of like a pot, right? Sometimes it's at a raging boil, and sometimes it's at a simmer, and sometimes it's just cooling. It is always there, but we have the ability to regulate it as we learn these skills, as we adopt these tools into the mainstream parenting life that we have. And you are not alone, and it is not your fault. And we can get through this together. Grief also gives us this amazing opportunity to focus more deeply on the things that really do inspire us, that really do bring us joy. Grief unlocks this portal where we get to choose now who we are, how we show up, what we really want from life. Grief gives us that gift. It kind of seems like it shouldn't, but it does. It unlocks something for us. And when we can embrace that grief is going to be this guide to understanding ourselves better, to understanding our desires better, our wants, our hopes, who we are authentically, and it is going to take us on that journey. And when we lean into that and we allow the feelings to guide us, we do end up finding what is much truer in our lives. And for that, I am very thankful for my son for bringing me to this place. I love him so much and I miss him so much every single day. But the work that I do now honors him. And I think that's a beautiful part of grief too, is it shows us where we want to show up bigger in this world. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me for this really special episode. Thank you for going on this ongoing journey with parenting and all the lessons that I learn, and I get to share them with you. And I just want to say thank you, and I will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Responsible Parenting Podcast. If you like what you heard, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. If you know someone who would benefit from this podcast, I'd be honored if you'd share this episode with them. Until next time, know that you are enough, you are capable, you've made it through all of your hardest days, and we will keep growing on this parenting journey together. This podcast was produced by Kim Kelty and myself, Becky Jennings, and edited by the Kelty Method Branding and Podcasting.